beautiful night, and we call it
Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome back to Every Version Ever. This month's mini-series is going to be a little different. Instead of looking at a book or a fairy tale and exploring a bunch of different adaptations, this time we're looking at a film franchise, Walt Disney's Lady and the Tramp. For decades, since it was just the movie in 1955, and since that was just based on an idea by a Disney artist and a short magazine story, there really wasn't any spin-offs or adaptations to speak of. Until 2001, when it got a sequel, and 2019, when it got a live-action remake. And over the next 3 weeks, we're covering all three. Joining me for this project are Nicki, aka Trivial Theater, and Katie, aka Katie Draws Things. We always have so much fun getting together to talk about movies, and Lady and the Tramp was something we all grew up with, or at least the first film, and to a much lesser extent the second, so I figured this would be a really fun conversation. So, how familiar are you guys with Lady and the Tramp? Was this one that you guys grew up with, or
The original I watched as a kid, it was one of my favorites.
okay? Yeah, I watched this a lot as a kid.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say it was my favorite out of my little collection of VHS Disney collection, but when I wanted to watch something that wasn't like my top three favorite, this was a big one that I would go to change it up. So I watched it a lot, and it was really weird because I haven't seen it in a long time. So rewatching it, I was like, why is it just like beat for beat? I remember everything.
Uh-huh.
Well, and you look at kids' movie, Disney movies of the I guess the mid-century, and they do kind of that. There's nuance, but there's not a lot of nuance. It's just there to tell a good story.
hmm
Yeah, this was very simple compared to some other movies I've watched recently, but I think that's good for this kind of story, and they did a lot with it.
Oh yeah,
So even though the story is simple, it's very artistic in the way that they told the story.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that this was the first movie or first animated movie made with CinemaScope, so the extremely wide screen in comparison with the regular widescreen or even full screen, which most Disney movies had been using up until this point. And they were originally planning to do this one in full screen, but then I think CinemaScope had been getting more and more popular and they decided to go with that for this.
given the time, I could see that. There's that one theater out in LA. It's the three screen wide. If you're talking like westerns and things like that, or like Lawrence of Arabia type epics, they would do them
Mhm.
on those. So I could see that coming in. I think that came in roughly the same time.
When you were watching it, did the screen aspect ratio ever stand out to you?
Not specifically. I guess you go in as long as the aspect ratio doesn't change, dramatically. I think I guess you kind of take it where it is.
I think probably because I knew that this was the first one in CinemaScope, that was the reason that it stood out to me. But for scenes, there were certain scenes that I felt like the CinemaScope ratio improved them. And the first one that I'm specifically thinking of is the scene where Lady is trying to get Jim Deere out of bed. Because of the frame, like it's so long that to do like a close up on just Lady, Jim Deere is kind of almost completely cropped out of it. And you like it was a specific choice for them to make it so that you never really get a great look at the faces of the humans because they're so much bigger than the dogs. But I think that that was really helped by the CinemaScope ratio because you can zoom in on the dogs and then everybody else just howers out of frame because it's so, I guess, so much thinner than you would normally think of a frame of a movie.
Right. I think too that you think like the Peanuts, any of the Peanuts cartoons, you'll only ever see the adults like waist and down, or you see hands. Like
Hmm.
the emphasis is on the dogs. The
Yeah,
people are there and they matter, but they don't matter as much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which they could do that. They could do something similar with any frame ratio, but I don't know. Maybe it's just because I had the CinemaScope ratio on the mind when I was watching it. It just seemed like it was a perfect choice for this movie.
Agreed.
I do think that like now that you mentioned that, like I do think sometimes when you get like long shots of just like landscape, I do
Hmm.
remember like being like I feel like I saw more for some reason. Like it felt
Yes.
kind of like I was seeing more than you would usually,
Hmm.
which isn't a bad thing. But like it was like I kind of did notice that, but it was kind of like a passing thought in the back of the head. So like that's interesting.
And for scenes where it's just like a landscape shot, I think it looks so good in the widescreen.
Hmm.
Like the opening scene with the town, or when they're up on the hill and you see all the cars as they're like looking down over the hill at night.
Yeah.
I think that just looks so good in such a widescreen. So are you guys familiar with where this story came from?
I didn't know.
No.
I thought it was interesting that this is kind of, aside from Dumbo, this is the very first story that kind of was made up completely for a movie. Like with Dumbo, there was a book, but the book never ended up getting published, and they also deviated from it so much that it's basically its own story. But with this one, this came from an idea of one of the Walt Disney artists, Joe Grant. He was inspired by his own dog, which was an English Springer Spaniel named Lady,
Aw.
and they had a baby, and she kind of got shoved aside. And he liked this idea of telling the story from the dog's perspective of what happens when a family just has a dog and then brings home a baby.
Well, and it's kind of a tale as old as time. And I mean, you always hear people now, especially with like COVID and such. There was that, oh, we need you give so much time to whatever pet you have, and then you go back to work and you can't dedicate
Mm,
the time. But that actually makes a lot more sense now. There was a novel in the trivia. It said there was a novel that was put out 2 years before the actual movie to kind of
yes.
introduce people to the characters.
Yeah. So when he pitched this idea to Disney, Disney liked the idea and he told him to get started on fleshing out a story. But all the ideas that he came up with for the story, Disney didn't really like them. He thought Lady was too sweet and there wasn't enough action. But then he read a story in Cosmopolitan magazine called Happy Dan the Cynical Dog, and he thought the story would be much improved if Lady fell in love with a cynical dog character. So the author of that story was Ward Green. He bought the rights to that story and then got Green to kind of combine the two and make a bigger story. And before this, like in the late 40s, Grant left the studio, but Disney kept working on the idea. And this is one of the things where I think they're trying to make things right in recent years. So the story was like Joe Grant's idea, but because he left the studio and Disney brought on the author of this Happy Dan the Cynical Dog story, Ward Green got all the credit.
Ah.
So in recent years, people have been trying to bring Joe Grant back into the Disney history. Like this is where the story actually came from.
Hmm.
And that's good that they do that. It's like anything else. You're never going to be able to make it up to that person, but if you can, get it back in whatever way you can, that's huge.
Hmm. And I feel like at least around this time, that kind of thing happened probably a little too much because I know like with the Jungle Book, and that's another one that stands on my head because the artist Bill Peet was behind a lot of the Jungle Book.
Mhm.
And because of everything that happened with the Jungle Book, so many things changing, Bill Peet ended up leaving the studio and other people picked up where he left off and got all the credit. But he was the one who was like behind it in the first place.
Wasn't there a thing too, and this is slightly tangenting, which I know is unique to us, but even with Mickey Mouse, like the very foundation of Mickey Mouse when it was Mortimer Mouse, wasn't that what was the name of the
Yeah,
studio?
Iworks.
Yeah,
Yeah, he really helped come up with the entirety of the creation, and it's kind of just all been tributed to Disney at this point.
right.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that, like you say, that's a thing that probably happened a lot and probably still does happen, which, we'll hear about in 40 years' time. But for that time and place, being that the medium was so new, kind of the Wild West.
It probably was a little bit different with Mickey because with he stayed on with the studio for decades.
Yeah.
I think they probably defaulted to giving Walt Disney the credit because he was the face of the company.
Right? Makes sense.
So it probably made more sense. I think with things like Lady and the Tramp or Jungle Book, it probably was a little bit more, I don't know, bad blood between the studio and the artists because they left the studio and then got no credit for what they did.
Right. And at that point, I'm sure it probably falls under the umbrella of, well, you created this while you were at our studio. We have those rights to those things that you did.
Hmm.
Kindly,
Yeah.
go. I'm trying to think of something that would be a nice way to put it.
Well, I'm sure, like, legally,
Oh,
everything is in the
exactly.
right, but it's not nice to the
Right.
artists.
Reputation is everything.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I also thought it was interesting in doing the research because the story kept changing so much. There was a bunch of stuff that was changed from the original ideas to what we finally saw on screen. In the original, Aunt Sarah was going to be an overbearing mother-in-law, which seems kind of like what she is anyway. So,
Well, she's kind of got that whole spinster, like the classic. You go back to that era with like old, like classic movies. The spinster aunt is just
yeah,
like that kind of person.
yeah.
Hmm.
It's very tropey for the, and not in a bad way by any stretch, but it was, kind of the trope of the era.
Hmm. And originally, her cats were going to be named Nip and Tuck instead of Thigh and Anne. And Tramp also, his name kept changing. He was Homer, Rags, and Bozo at different points in the story. I think Tramp was the right choice to land on.
Yeah. I did like how they incorporated, and I'm sure that was probably just a case of him going from place to place, but like how he described like every family that like fed him had a different name for him,
Yes.
and you could kind of relate back.
Uh-huh.
I also did have to laugh, and I don't mean to jump ahead to a little bit, but they never refer to him as Tramp in
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, they always call him the Tramp.
Right.
I wonder if Jim Deere and Darling ever ended up giving him a name.
Yeah, like I guess they did, because if you take the sequel as canon, like everyone just calls him Tramp as a name.
Yeah.
So it's like, how convenient.
Yeah, can you imagine? And I know people name their dogs and cats all kinds of things, but can you imagine, hey, Tramp, come here, Tramp.
I like the convenience that that's what all the dogs called him
Yeah.
before they called him that name.
Yeah. I feel like Tramp is not, I mean, it kind of makes sense for
Oh,
a
yeah.
homeless street dog. If you adopted a dog off the street, calling him Tramp kind of, it seems fitting.
Oh, yeah. It's like calling a cat cat. You could be like John Wayne and call his dog just dog.
And did you guys know that Jim Deere and Darling are not actually their names?
I kind of figured.
The original, like in the original script, and I don't know if this is canon or not, but their names were Jim Brown and Elizabeth. And they decided to go with Jim Deere and Darling because that's what Lady hears them call each other all the time. So she just thinks that that's their names,
Ah, okay.
I could see that.
which is kind of perfect. I kind of love that.
They definitely fit the era. Like the both the proper
Mhm.
names and the terms of endearment.
Uh-huh.
What would you call the little one though? I know that in the remake it's Lulu, but I don't think does the little baby ever get a name?
Um,
Did he have a name in the sequel?
Oh, it's Junior. It's Junior in the sequel. That's what it is.
okay, yeah.
So he's probably Jim Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim Deere Jr. JDJ.
But yeah, I thought that was a really cute choice to make them named after what Lady thinks their names are. It's like kids thinking their parents are named Mom and Dad, and their
Yeah.
minds are blown when they find out that's not actually their names. And then I found out, I completely forgot, this was the last film for Disney that Mary Blair ever worked on because she was such a huge part of the studio for so many years. And she was supposed to do more on this film. She was supposed to be the background painter, but she wanted to go on to become an illustrator for children's books. So this ended up being her last film. And they had other artists come in to like do all the background work.
Oh.
Oh,
It wasn't her last thing she ever did with Disney because he asked her to come back years later to design this It's a Small World ride, but it was her last film.
I don't know if this is true or not because sometimes the IMDb trivia can be a little bit suspect, but according to it, Peggy Lee was considered the first instance of a superstar voice being used for an animated film.
That could be. I'm trying to think of who might have been before.
I mean, from a Disney perspective, there's not that many movies that came before this, really.
The only thing that is really standing out to me would be the voice of Cinderella. And it's not the same because I don't know that you would call her a superstar because Walt Disney heard her voice on the radio, I believe.
Hmm. Honestly, I'm thinking back now that I say that. I just did I went to a showing of a bunch of 16 millimeter cartoons from the 30s, and Cab Calloway had a really famous cartoon thing with Betty Boop where they did Minnie the
Mm-hmm.
Mooch,
Yeah.
and that would be considered. I mean, it's not Disney animation, but it is still an animated piece. He was
Yeah.
massively well known at the time. So
I
I take back what I said.
Well, I think it's different for some of those, especially the Betty Boop cartoons, because with Betty Boop, they did a lot of, I don't know, cameos.
Fair.
Like they would have like a music artist come in and then they would do like a caricature of them, like singing the song or doing a dance. So that was kind of a feature in some of those earlier shorts. But as far as Disney, the closest I can think of would be Cinderella, and that was Eileen Woods. She was a radio actress, and she really didn't do a ton as far as like acting for movies and TV. She only has 7 credits on IMDb,
Oh, okay.
but I think that she was famous on the radio because I don't remember who discovered her exactly, but she was a radio actress and they loved her voice and thought she would be perfect for Cinderella. But I don't know that I would call her like a superstar. But I feel
Right.
like that's probably the closest you could get. But yeah, Peggy Lee was quite famous. She was a kind of a prolific songwriter. She actually wrote a lot of the music for this. She and Sonny Burke, who's a name that I know from somewhere, but I don't know why I know. But he was a composer. He did like, I think, jazz and ragtime music, which I think my parents listened to some of that when I was growing up. So maybe I heard his name somewhere in there. I know that's like another famous musician from the time. But Sonny and Peggy Lee wrote the songs together along with composer Oliver Wallace. And Oliver Wallace did a lot of the scores for Disney up until this point. This is actually his last film, too.
Wow.
Well, his last animated film. I think I read his final film was The Incredible Journey in 63, which would be a few years after this. But as far as his animation work for Disney, this was his last one. But yeah, Peggy Lee, I didn't realize, like, I knew that she was kind of famous, but I didn't realize how famous she was until I started researching for this. Apparently, she is often cited as the inspiration for the margarita. Apparently, she went to Mexico, and when she came back, she wanted something similar to what she drank there. So she told a bartender, like, roughly what to do, and he came up with the margarita and named it after the Spanish version of her name.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the thing that kind of blew my mind the most was Miss Piggy was designed after her.
Really?
The designer of Miss Piggy's original puppet, Bonnie Erickson, grew up in her home state, North Dakota, and used her as the inspiration for Miss Piggy. And actually, she was originally called Miss Piggy Lee, but then they eventually shortened her name to Miss Piggy when she became like one of the main characters of the Muppets,
Right.
which I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that makes, hearing that, like, and seeing them side by side, yeah, I can see that.
Absolutely.
And Peggy Lee, she obviously voiced Peg, but she was also the voice of Cy and Am, the cats, as well as Darling,
I could see that.
which I never realized that she was also the voice of Darling.
I wouldn't have guessed it offhandedly, but now that you say it, I can definitely hear it.
Hmm. And there was a bunch of actors in here that voiced a lot of characters. Like I know that a lot of people do that even nowadays, but it's usually just like the side characters and like the background characters that they just bring on a handful of voice actors and then they just do a bunch. But everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of the main people in this voiced a bunch of people
Yeah.
or dogs.
Yeah.
Because you had Jim Deere was Lee Miller. He was also the voice of the dog catcher. And actually, he was also, I didn't realize that, he was the son of Verna Felton, who played Aunt Sarah. And he didn't have, he wasn't a huge actor. I'm not sure. It was kind of confusing because when I looked him up on IMDb, it says he voiced Pluto in a bunch of cartoons in the 30s and 40s. But his father is also named Lee Miller, and he has way more Pluto credits on his page. So I'm wondering if somebody at IMDb screwed up and
Huh.
got them mixed up.
It happens. It's kind of like Wikipedia. It's moderated, but it's not moderated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder. He obviously has Disney connections, but I was kind of wondering if maybe Verna Felton was the closest connection that got him this job, because she's like, I don't want to say she's Disney royalty, but she kind of almost is, because she's like so many iconic characters. Like, you have a lot of people that were in a bunch of Disney movies that were in a bunch, and like everybody kind of knows them, but Verna Felton, she was the fairy godmother in Cinderella, the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, Flora in Sleeping Beauty. And then my favorite thing is that she voiced elephants in both Dumbo and The Jungle Book. Her first and last roles for Disney was voicing elephants. And she also voiced an elephant in a short called Goliath the Second, which I thought was great. I love her voice. And then Lady was voiced by Barbara Luddy, who was a silent actress in the 20s and 30s. And then I think in a couple of early, I guess you would call them talkies, with voices. But she stopped acting in 1933, and this was her first film back 22 years later in
Wow.
1955. And then she kind of went on to become an actor for small roles. She was in a bunch of Disney films, and she did a bunch of one-off TV appearances. But she was also the voice of Merryweather in Sleeping Beauty, Rover in 101 Dalmatians, which I think is the puppy that loves watching TV. And she was the Mrs. Churchmouse in Robin Hood, as well as the Mother Rabbit, and also Kanga in the Winnie the Pooh shorts from the 60s and 70s, which was her final role, because she died in 1979.
She had such a cute voice.
Yes, she did. And one of the most interesting things that I discovered was Tramp was voiced by Larry Roberts, who he was mostly a stage actor. He only really has one other role on IMDb. And after Lady and the Tramp, he pretty much completely retired from acting and went on to become a women's clothing designer. I don't know why that just cracked me up when I read that.
That's cool.
What an interesting pivot.
Variety is the spice of life.
At least he went out on probably his most iconic role.
Absolutely. Yeah, but his voice, it is a very attractive voice. So I'm sure
Yeah.
trying to sell to women or get across the point, I could see it working.
And then most everybody else in this movie were people who did a bunch of voices. You have Bill Thompson as Jock, the Scottish Terrier. He also voiced Joe, the assistant chef, and Bull, the male bulldog. Like, I don't remember these names, but these are ones that are credited as these, because I don't really remember anybody except Peg of all of the random dogs. And Doxy, the stray male dog. I always want to say Dachshund because of the way it's spelled, but it's Dachshund. He voiced the Irish policeman, which I kind of figured when he started talking, I was like, that's the same voice actor as Jock.
Yeah, his Irish accent and his Scottish accent sound kind of similar.
Yeah.
Just don't say that to any Scottish or Irish people in real life and you'll be fine. I will say his song was always one of my favorites. I don't know why, but when I was a kid, I'd always try to like mimic that song because I thought it was cool. I was a weird kid.
But he was actually a really good voice actor, because I didn't realize it was the same person who voiced Mr. Smee and the White Rabbit
Oh, yeah.
from Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. Like, because his voice for those are so similar, but this doesn't sound anything like those. But then he was also King Hubert in Sleeping Beauty and Uncle Waldo in The Aristocats, and he was the first voice actor to ever play Scrooge McDuck on screen,
Oh.
which kind of makes sense after hearing Jock.
Yes.
But he had a good range for what he could do. And then you had Stan Freberg as the Beaver. And I read that he was later the inspiration for Gopher from Winnie the Pooh. But when I was a kid, I used to think they were the same character.
Yeah, I think, yeah, same.
But he's most known for like tons of shorts. Like he did a lot of Looney Tunes voices. I think his most famous was Pete, Puma, and Junior Bear. And then he was one of the chipmunks of the Goofy Gophers. I wouldn't have known which one was which because I can't tell them apart, but he was Tosh. And then he did all the voices in the short The Three Little Bops, which is kind of the other really famous version of The Three Little Pigs. Besides Disney's, it was the Looney Tunes version of The Three Little Pigs. And then you had Alan Reed as Boris, I don't know how to pronounce it, Borzoi, Bourgeois. the dog with the Russian accent.
Uh-huh.
But he's best known as Fred Flintstone, which I think,
Serious? Oh my
yeah,
god.
that I was like, whoa, I did not realize that Fred Flintstone was in Lady and the Tramp. And then you had a kind probably here as this character because he was there for the music and they just gave him Al the Alligator. You had Thurl Ravenscroft, but he was a member of the Mellow Men who did a bunch of music like singing for kind of the background stuff, but they were in so many old Disney movies that I didn't even realize. And because of that, he has been in a ton of Disney movies. The one that is probably least musical is he was Monstro in Pinocchio, the whale. But he was also in Dumbo, Saludos Amigos, Melody Time, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, all the Winnie the Pooh shorts, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, Mary Poppins, The Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians, Sword in the Stone, The Aristocats, and then Brave Little Toaster, which is sort of Disney and sort of not Disney. It's a muddy history there, but
Yeah.
yeah,
That's like Roger Rabbit.
kind of, yes. But he also did voices for Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and the Tiki Room at Disneyland. And then later he came back and did even more voices for later attractions like Splash Mountain and the Railroad.
It's kind of like is it Chauncey Brown or
Clancy Brown.
That does all the like anytime there's like an animal sound or some kind of like you might have a slight speaking role, but by and large it's more almost sound effect-esque, that kind of a voice.
I don't think that's Clancy Brown. I think that is.
Who am I thinking of? I can't offhandedly think of who that is.
I think you're thinking of Frank Welker.
Yeah, Frank Welker.
Is it Frank
really
Welker?
big.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does some speaking roles, obviously, like Fred Jones from Scooby-Doo, but he's very good at like animals and stuff.
But Clancy Brown, I suppose he probably could, but he's most known for like
I'm
Mr.
thinking
Krabs and
D.
SpongeBob.
Bradley. I'm thinking of D.
Oh.
Bradley Baker.
D. Bradley Baker also does that.
Yes,
Okay,
that's who I was thinking of. I apologize.
I mean, there's more than one person who is good at lots of
Yeah.
different kinds of voice acting.
Oh yeah, agreed.
But yeah, Thurl Ravenscroft did a lot of animal noises too. Like I said, his first one for Disney was the whale in Pinocchio.
And he's got a great name. That's an incredible name.
Oh yeah, I love his name. It's kind of funny though, the thing that he's most known for, because so many of his roles were just bit parts, the thing he is best known for now is he was the voice of Tony the Tiger for Frosty Flakes.
Was it great?
He did a great job.
Ah,
Now, I didn't realize he also voiced Jeffrey the Giraffe for Toys R Us in the 70s and 80s also. And of course, he also sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch in the original Grinch cartoon.
nice.
Ah,
But yeah, he has a great voice.
yeah.
And I don't know if you guys know this, but I feel like this is one of the most famous stories about Lady and the Tramp. The opening sequence when Darling unwraps the hat box that Lady is inside. It was inspired by Walt Disney himself when he gave his wife Lily a chow puppy as a gift in a hat box to make up for having previously forgotten a dinner date with her.
Aw. I feel like that either might have been a thing or it became a thing because in a lot of movies, at least, you'll see like that same scene sort of play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, the town that they go through was based off of Marceline, Missouri, which is where Disney was from.
Yeah, they did such a great job with that old town. It looked like
They
such
did
I don't know, homey place to live.
very much.
It felt real.
Yeah,
It did.
and I love the house designs, especially Lady's house.
It's funny that it's based off Missouri though, because in the second one they all sing about how it's a New England town.
Oh, did they?
Well, I think the it was based off of his hometown, but it wasn't necessarily set in.
Yeah.
So
It's just funny that like they based it off a place and then I think like the sequel people weren't clued in on that. And so they're like, welcome to our New England town. I don't remember how the lyrics go.
well, this kind of all over the place. The first one really you don't get a location on. The second one is in New England. The third one is set, or the remake is set in New Orleans.
Yeah.
I guess they're just going for Americana and they wanted
Yeah.
to put flavor in each film. Yeah, like I said, it's a pretty simple plot. You have it start out with she's a gift from Jim Deere to Darling. And I love the scene where they're trying to get her to stay in her little bed. Like, you can tell that they actually studied dogs for this. Just the way that she moved and behaved and the little howls outside the door, it felt
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah, for sure. Like I've had puppies and that's basically what we had to kind of go through.
Aw.
Like they're just like, I want to be with you all the time, and you're like, you can't, I'm sorry. They skipped over the potty training session though,
Well,
which
he put down a newspaper, so
yeah, I know.
that's all that counts, I guess.
I mean that's how easy it is. You just put down the newspaper and bam, your puppy's potty trained.
They just know.
They're like, oh yeah, we know. Your carpets are not a newspaper. We can tell the difference because we're dogs, and that's just how it works, I guess.
I feel like even though most of the dogs in this movie are well behaved, it's just like even the scene with Lady, like I love Lady as a character, but like this is why I'm a cat person.
Yeah, same.
I don't want to be needed that much.
Oh,
Agreed.
I like dogs, but I don't want to keep one with me all the time.
that's funny. I'm a dog person, so but they're so precious.
I feel like if I could find a dog that was
Like
more
a cat.
cat, like happy to do its own thing when I'm not around, and
Yeah.
not need me to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I like dogs. I had one when I was a kid. I've never wanted to get a new one after. Yeah, it's just I'm fine with cats because they do their own thing and you can cuddle them when they're ready, and that's that's
And
good for me.
they'll probably let go of you before you'll want to let go of them.
Yeah, usually. But then another thing that I really liked, like kind of going back to the fact that she thinks her owners' names are Jim, Dear, and Darling. Everything is told from the dog's perspective so that you kind of have to figure out what's going on. Like they eventually do say it, but I
Yeah.
like the way they introduce the idea of Darling being pregnant with Lady telling Jock and Trusty about her owner's weird behavior.
Yeah.
And I mean, it becomes kind of obvious and then they actually go out and say it. But I like that they kind of just show you things and then you, the audience, figure it out.
Yeah, I think this movie like really is a good showcase of show, don't tell.
Yes, yeah.
So much of it is that. Like they don't sit down and be like, "Oh, this is obviously we are the rich people up here and those over there.
Mhm.
They're not the rich people," which, definitely won't I didn't have a problem with any other movies after this one that really was heavy-handed about that kind of stuff.
I sense your foreshadowing.
But yeah, I think that they did a really good job with like, they show you like the baby bottles and the little boots, and then like they
Mhm.
don't say, "Oh, we're at a baby shower." Like when I was a kid, I didn't know what a baby shower was. So I was like, "Oh, they're all just," but I understood like they're all getting together and they're talking about the baby.
Mhm.
Like I barely understood that scene as a child because like I never went to a baby shower when I was really little, and I was like, I don't understand what they're saying. But like it really just like you're like it's different, it's strange, what's going on, and then like obviously at the end you can figure out, oh, it is a baby and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But like I think it's really well done, and it doesn't like talk down to you or over explain things sometimes, which some movies can end up doing, and I really enjoy that about the original.
Absolutely. But obviously that doesn't happen in any of the sequels to this.
The sequels are perfect, maybe.
Yeah.
I definitely was not frowning the entire time I was watching the sequel, but I'll talk about that later.
Yes. I'm trying very hard not to talk about anything that came after this.
Yeah.
It is kind of hard not to compare though, especially with the next chunk of movie where Jim, Dear, and Darling leave. Because I feel like this movie does it so perfectly, and then it's not done perfectly in the future.
Yeah.
But the way they set this all up so that Lady can have her adventure with Tramp, having Jim Deere and Darling leave and leaving her and the baby with Aunt Sarah and also Cy and Am, it's kind of perfect storytelling. And I feel like writers today should take some cues.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like everything makes sense. Like you're never confused of like why did someone make that decision or why did that happen that way. Even when it gets kind of wild, like let's go to the zoo to take off our harness. Like technically that doesn't make any logical sense in a leap of logic, but like it makes sense within the world and you're never like, what is going on? Why is this happening? You know?
Mhm. I feel like for a movie like this, it doesn't have to make absolute perfect sense. I feel
Yeah.
like it makes more sense here than it almost needs to, but
Mhm.
it is a cartoon. So I'm okay with a leap in logic like Tramp seeing her get this muzzle put on her and taking her to get it bitten off by an alligator. It's kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous, but it's also a cartoon, and I'm okay with that here.
And if we're talking weird stuff that happens in cartoons, this is pretty logical in the grand scheme of cartoon logic.
I mean,
Yeah.
I almost feel like this is less cartoony than I don't want to keep jumping ahead to the remake, but like the scene with Cy and Am, I feel like the way they did it makes more sense in this movie than in the remake. Because with this, Cy and Am, they are acting antagonistic, and I feel like they do just enough damage to get Lady in trouble. But in the remake, they just basically go all out wild
They go ham, no doubt.
to a ridiculous degree, but I feel like it's much more restrained in this one, and it's just perfect because I love the way that they act. They're so mischievous, like they are so Siamese. Like if you've ever had a Siamese cat, this is how they are. It's so real. Like my uncle loved Siamese cats, and Sarah also likes Siamese to a degree. She doesn't want a Siamese, like a purebred Siamese, but she always makes special, like if she's going to get a new cat, she always looks in the shelters for something that says that they think it is part Siamese because they're just mischievous enough, I guess. Like the Siamese, they're little pills. They will destroy things if you don't watch them. And they knew what they were doing when they put Siamese cats as the antagonists of this movie.
What was that about cats being better than dogs earlier?
It depends on the cat.
I
do-
have
I
a
do-
black cat, and my black cat, although he can be a hellion, he is also sweet as the day is long.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
No, I
Yeah.
know, I know. I'm just being.
You dirty cat lovers.
I would put a Siamese cat in the same category as a dog in that I like them. I do not want one.
They're good from afar.
Yes. Yeah. Like, no, I prefer a cat that is just chilled out. Like, I really like Maine Coons. They're so chill. They're almost a little like a dog in that they can be playful, but they're so
And
chill.
So huge.
Yes.
Also, you have to shave them.
You don't have to, but if you don't take care of their fur, then you will have to because it'll
Yeah.
get knotted up.
Right. I have friends that have a Maine Coon and they shave it because during the summertime it just gets so hot.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is also a consideration, especially in Iowa.
Yes.
But yeah, the whole scene with Cyanam, I really liked it. Like even like obviously now the song is questionable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the stereotype that they're obviously alluding to, I will say it's not cool,
Hmm.
but I will say, whilst I don't agree with the stereotype of the song and the attitude of the cats and what they're based off of, it's better than the song in the remake. I know no comparison,
Yes,
but
I was holding my tongue until we get there, but you are very correct.
but I think just the issue I have with the remake song is that it just didn't really have a tune to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an issue, yeah.
Like I can't remember how it went.
No, me neither. And I just watched it this morning.
Yeah,
You know what it
like,
reminds me of? It's kind of like the songs, any of the songs from Wish. There is just no, it's catchy, but it doesn't stick with you. There's nothing there that stands out.
yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
That is my personal preference. I have a vendetta against Wish, but that is my personal thing.
Yeah, no, you're amongst like-minded people with that one.
Yay! One thing this is more back to, I guess, design and all that kind of stuff, but you talk about how the cats and the dogs really behaved like cats and dogs of that era. Um, with the house, the lady's house was actually, they built a replica of it so that way they knew kind of how to place people.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
That's
That-
according to
that-
IMDb, but so again, it may not be 100% accurate, but being how much they tried to make it right, I wouldn't be surprised if they took the time to really go into those extra details.
hmm Well, even if they just planned it out, they wouldn't really even have to build the whole thing. I feel like they're doing more than a lot of other. I can't think of anything specific, but there will be times when you're watching something, and sometimes something will just stand out to you, and like, how does that make sense with what happened in that room? Like, how did they fit together?
Mhm.
Well, one of the things that I can think of is, I think it's Seinfeld, the way that apartment is set up, and based on the doors outside, the way the apartment is built does not make sense. Also, another, like, I'm talking about sitcoms, so not exactly the same, but Full House. I remember watching Full House as a kid and thinking the door didn't look right because of the way the door looked from the outside and the way it looked from the inside. I was like, I don't think that's the same door. But yeah, it makes perfect sense to like build a small replica or just plan it out. And I feel like if anybody's going to do something that detail oriented, it's going to be Disney and his team.
Oh yeah. Well, especially at that time in history. Not to say that animation was new out the box at that point in time, but you were still in kind of that classic era
hmm
where the time and energy, and not to say there's a lot of good stuff that's put out now, but the time and energy that went into it was like a mandate almost,
hmm
be that unwritten or not.
Disney was always trying to push the boundaries beyond what people of the like his contemporaries were doing. Because a lot of studios would try and cut corners wherever they could, and he wanted to make sure things looked as best as they could. Sometimes to his detriment, because like thinking in a few years when they would go on to make 101 Dalmatians, it was necessary to cut corners with the introduction of the Xerox so that they could do all the dogs and all the spots and make everything look like it worked. And Disney didn't like how it looked, but I do. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
love how 101 Dalmatians looks now, but it didn't look perfect to him. So he definitely did a good job in being detail oriented, but I would say that once in a while he could take it a bit too far.
Mhm.
Not for this movie though. But yeah, with you have the scene with Cyan Am, and then she gets the muzzle because they sort of destroyed the house. I should also mention I loved when they flipped over on their backs and were like, acting injured. I loved that little scene. I love the way they're animated. But yeah, she gets a muzzle, and then Lady ends up getting loose and going off with Tramp and having their day together. And you have the scene with the restaurant, Tony's restaurant, with the spaghetti dinner. This has like become one of the most iconic scenes for Disney. I don't think that when I was little, I don't think it ever stood out to me as anything too special.
I liked Tony and Joe. Like I remember I was like, I want them to come back in the movie because I thought they had a fun dynamic.
Oh, they had a
Mhm.
great dynamic, yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably for me, the things that I liked the most were not to be too cliche, but all like the action scenes that Disney would have wanted. I think those are the things that stood out to me, and all the animals. Like I loved anything with the animals, so I loved the zoo. But
Mhm.
like obviously, it is a really well done scene with the spaghetti dinner.
Well, and even just how many times that scene has been replicated.
Yeah. hmm But I don't think I cared too much about it. I remember watching it as a kid and thinking that it seemed ridiculous that they would both end up slurping up the same noodle. It's like, how do they manage that?
Where's your romantic side?
I think this is another case where, as a kid, I thought too much about things. And then, of course, you get the scene with them like overlooking the town. I don't think I remembered like the place that they are. When it pulls back, you can see a whole bunch of cars around them. So this is supposed to be like a romantic overlook. I don't think that ever stood out to me as a kid. I didn't think anything of it. But I really liked that detail, having the cars like not like fully prominent, but like kind of in the shadows. as Lady and the
Uh-huh.
Tramp are looking over the town, you've got a bunch of other couples there as well.
Lovers lookout.
Yeah. And then, of course, the next day, when Lady is eventually caught by the dog catcher and she meets all the other dogs, you get the He's a Tramp song. I think that's the song that I most associate with this movie. Although, other than the Siamese Cat song, because I loved that song as a kid. I think I had the Siamese Cat song memorized as a kid. Watching it now, though, I really liked some of the songs at the beginning, like the opening song and like the lullaby. Those are really good. But the He's a Tramp song with Peg is probably the most iconic to me right now.
Well, and the ability to like animate Peg in a way where she's sultry and a dog.
Yeah.
Because you just got that, like that, not Mae West, but kind of that, the ability to emote that sultry in a kid's movie, but done well.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I don't know how much of like obviously in some cases it can be a bit of a problem, but I feel like this is kind of a trope of movies at the time to have a whole bunch of animals as different stereotypes. And you've got like all of the different accented dogs in the pound.
Yeah.
Like obviously you can get into shaky ground when you end up with characters like Cy and Am, but I kind of liked some of these little guys.
Yeah, I think the problem isn't that, in a sense, they're stereotypes or that they all have different accents. I think to an extent, it's how you utilize those stereotypes.
Yeah.
And also, like, how you do kind of say, these are probably white guys just trying
Yeah,
to
that
sound
too.
like. So, like, to an extent, you're kind of like, okay. Like, like if you watch, like, Oliver and Company, you have the little chihuahua, but he's
Mhm.
voiced
Yeah, Cheech
you know,
Marin.
yeah, so he's actually
Yeah.
voiced. So like, whilst he has stereotypes to him, it's better to me at least. I think
Yeah.
as obviously someone who's very knowledgeable about this. No, but like, I'm not going to be like, darn Lady and the Tramp, we should just destroy it. And I don't think anyone's really saying that, anyways.
No,
So
no.
like,
Of all the problematic movies from
yeah,
Disney's past, I think this is one of the least egregious ones. It just basically the Siamese Cat song is all that's like really stand out, glaring, like, no,
yeah.
this doesn't quite
Yeah.
work today.
Yeah, it's like, oh, but you probably could have thought that one through a bit more.
There's always a thing about context with any of this stuff, and I know that, like we said, or the Siamese Cat song is not the worst example of that. But I don't know if you guys had this, but on Disney Plus, watching it, they had a black screen up front that talked
Yeah.
about things at the time, and Warner Brothers did that too, with a lot
Mhm.
of their classics,
Yeah.
as compared to editing them down, which thank God. But
Yeah. No, I collect the Looney Tunes, like the gold collection.
mhm.
I don't think it was in all of them, but there was at least one of those collections that had like a bunch of the worst examples. They had a whole segment with Whoopi Goldberg talking about it would be wrong to try and erase the past, so we're not going to censor these cartoons, something like that. It's been a
Right,
while since I watched it, which I much prefer that than just take the Song of the South route and hide it forever and no one can see that we did this thing.
right.
I thought it was kind of interesting that they had, like, they didn't really tell. This is another thing where they showed, not told, with the dog that got put down. Like, I thought it was interesting that they had something like that. And I think it's probably to set up the danger to Tramp in the end. But I thought it was interesting that they would put something like that, something as dark as that, in a movie. Not that
Mm.
Disney shied away from dark things, but I don't know. It just seemed a little darker than he would normally go.
Yeah. Poor Nutsy.
Yeah, R.I.P.
Justice for Nutsy. Join my campaign.
I think it's a little late now.
No, Nutsy.
I'm sorry. I always remember, and this is again, sorry, slightly tangenting, but closer in than the Royals. Like you look at the Dumbo movie, like
Mhm.
one when his mom is kind of, I guess incarcerated for lack of a better term, and there's that whole scene, or when he goes and gets drunk, and like all of
Yeah.
the, oh my God, that scared the crap out of me as a kid.
It's weird that everybody says that that was terrifying. I thought it was fascinating as a kid.
Oh, it was fascinating, but it was still freaky as hell.
I think just different things scared me as kids. I never got scared by the things that scare most kids. Eventually, Lady is claimed. Aunt Sarah comes, gets her, and chains her in the backyard. And you have the scene with Jock and Trusty coming to, I guess, propose marriage to her. And this is one of those scenes that I feel like people nowadays are trying to read more into it than was intended. Because I remember a while back reading that the reason that they did this is because Lady got pregnant and they need to make sure that she's kept respectable.
Oh God.
And when
What?
I read that a while back, and like I've seen it multiple times online, like that this is the adult meanings hidden in your favorite Disney movies. And I hadn't watched Lady and the Tramp in years. So not that I accepted it that somebody said that, but I was like, I'll watch it and see if I can get that from the scene. And I watched it, I was like, they are reading way too much into this.
You mean things like Watch Mojo read too much into that stuff? Come on. That's crazy.
They basically,
When has that ever happened?
I think they just think Lady got abandoned by her owners and they are trying to give her a home away from Aunt Sarah.
Also true.
I think that's the point of this scene. It is kind of weird that they decide to propose marriage to her. Like, I don't know how their owners would feel about them bringing in a new wife. But I think that's what the scene was. I don't think it was Lady is secretly pregnant.
My God. And I understand the 50s was quite a long time ago, but what? Yeah, anyway.
I think if they had meant that to be the meaning of that scene, they would have made it more obvious to the adults. Because when I read that, I was like, okay, well, they must have phrased it in some way that I would not have understood as a kid, but I would understand as an adult. And watching it now, it's like, no, there is no line in here that gives you any indication that that's what's happening.
Right. I mean, you kind of do get, and I guess as an adult in 2024, looking back at a movie from 1955, you could take the kind of aftermath of their Italian dinner as like a romantic interlude. It leads to other things, but even still,
I think that's what they're doing. They're seeing two pieces of a puzzle and drawing their own picture in between them.
Oh, agreed. Repeat to yourself, it's just a show. You should really just relax. MST3K mantra early and often is my prescription for those folks.
Yeah. But yeah, during the scene, Tramp arrives and they turn their backs on him. He's not wanted here. And then you get what was the most horrifying scene to me as a child, this huge rat sneaking into the house. I don't know what it is about this rat because it's not that scary now, but as a kid, that thing was horrifying. Different things scare different children, and I was terrified of this rat. It was the most creepy looking thing.
I mean, it's big, it's shadowy, and it's got beady red eyes and like an evil grin, and then it tries to attack a baby. So I can see why you could be scared of that.
But I also love that it made like little squeaky duck noises.
Okay, was the rat scarier than Aunt Sarah saying, "Ah, a rat"?
The rat was scarier. I was terrified of that thing. But it did its job because they really wanted to amp up the stakes for the end of this movie, and they did a really good job with this rat.
And I know that we're not at a time and place in the history of animation where they're going to end with a big boss battle, but the simplicity of this, in the grand scheme of things, it's very small, but it is significant and so well done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love the way they lit it because, like, this is at night. I think it's raining, and she calls Tramp to go in after this rat because she's chained up. And the way they light this fight, having it, like, mostly dark, but you see his teeth flashing as he's barking and trying to bite the rat. I thought that was really well done.
Very.
Yeah, he kills the rat, but during the fight, the crib gets overturned. The baby's crying. Aunt Sarah comes to see what's going on. And like I can't fault Aunt Sarah for thinking that the dog has done something terrible because it really, without seeing the rat, that's what it looks like. So yeah, I can't, even though she's not the nicest person, I can't really fault her here.
Yeah, like a thing I like about the original is while you have quote unquote the bad people, they're never showcased as just like evil, conniving,
Yes.
horrible people. They're just kind of like, oh, you can tell that Aunt Sarah is not a dog person.
Yes. There's a lot more nuance.
Right.
Yeah, she doesn't know how to handle a dog.
Yeah.
So is Aunt Sarah John?
Hopefully not, but
But even the dog catcher isn't the worst person in the world because, like, he takes the steps to find where Lady actually comes from and stuff like that. He's not like, haha, another notch on my belt of capturing evil, terrible, dirty strays or anything like that. Like, while in the eyes of the dogs, he's not a good person, he's not showcased as like an evil person.
Mhm.
Right.
Even though like they still have the whole one-way door and stuff, and that's a terrible thing. But like in an essence, the person himself isn't a terrible person.
Yeah. But yeah, she calls the dog catcher. Tramp gets taken away, and Jim, Dear, and Darling come home at that moment. The dog catcher says something about the dog attacking a baby. So they run in to see what happened. And Lady is now free. She immediately goes to show them this dead rat, and they figure out what's going on. And I like the scene with Jock and Trusty. Like, they assume the worst about Tramp, and then as soon as they hear about the rat, they're like, we misjudged him. And then they go and try and make things right.
That is a very dog thing to do because like sometimes my dogs will be like, "Who are you? Who are you?" And I'll be like, "It's just me coming home." And they'll be like, "Oh, we're so sorry. We're the worst. We're so sorry we barked at you. I'm sorry." And you're like, "You're fine." But like they'll immediately be like, "You are intruder. We hate you." And they're like, "Oh no, we're so sorry. We misjudged you."
Yeah, then you've got the chase between Jock and Trusty and the dog catcher, with Trusty trying to use his nose, finding the trail. And then he ends up getting injured when they cause the crash. And I couldn't remember. I thought I read somewhere that the original plan was for him to die in the wreck, but I don't know if that's true or not, because I could be getting that mixed up with the Fox and the Hound, because the original plan was to have Chief die. So I don't know if I just mixed up two fun facts. Fun facts.
Fun facts.
Like,
Small things, really.
You think dog death is funny, do you?
I didn't,
Yeah,
Terrible
it was
cat
freaking
person.
hilarious, man.
I didn't see it in my research this time, so I'm not sure if that was originally the plan or not. But yeah, they do end up saving Tramp, and he is adopted by Jim, Dear, and Darling. And then you've got the scene at the end with Christmas time. Tramp is now part of the family, and they have puppies, and Jock and Trusty are visiting. And I liked the scene between Trusty and the puppies, with him telling a story, because you've had Trusty trying to tell a story through various scenes in this, and he reminded me of a lot of old people that I've known throughout my life, telling the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the detail with the puppies. Now he has a new audience for the story, and then he completely forgets what he was going to say. I also liked the scene where Jim Deere is trying to take everybody's picture, and he uses too much flash powder in the camera. And I don't know why, the way they animated the baby and the puppies kind of like freezing and looking at this big flash. The expression on the baby's face cracked me up. And that's basically the end. You have the scene around the Christmas tree, and the music comes back in. Like I said, it's really simple, but they do it so well. I really like it.
Yeah. And sometimes the best stories, and it goes without saying, but the best stories handle the simple stuff well, and they tell a full story.
Yeah, I hadn't remembered how simple the story was, because watching movies nowadays, that there's like so many details, and you've got surprise twists and secret villains and all these things. But I don't know, there's something about the way that Disney used to do things. Not that they always did it the same way, but like in a lot of the movies, it was a very basic story, and it was like the way they told it and the art surrounding it that made it so memorable and so good. And this is just a prime example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Lady and the Tramp. I haven't really fully made out a ranking of all the Disney movies. I know a lot of Disney fans like to do that. I figure I'll wait and do that at the end, but I feel like this has to be somewhat near the top. It's at least in the top half of them for me, because this is one I watched a lot as a kid, and Lady and the Tramp is it's a classic for a reason, and it's so good. High recommendation for just a chill movie to put on for a fun movie night.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have high stakes, but it is enjoyable because you know that there was so much put into it.
Yeah. It's one of those where it's the artist trying to make a work of art for the sake of art. Like even the way that it started with Joe Grant coming up with this idea, a movie inspired by his dog. I feel like that in itself, it works so much better when it's an organic idea that a whole bunch of artists care about and flesh out into basically a work of art. Well, I guess that will be all for Lady and the Tramp, the original.
Yes.
We will be back next time.
The original and the best.
Yes.
The
Not
only movie.
Spoiler alert, but yes. Next time we'll talk about why it's the best, comparing it to things that aren't the best. So,
yay.
Until next time, do you guys want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you?
You can find me here on YouTube, Trivial Theater. I do a wide array of random, obscure, and straight up bad movies. Stop by and see what's up on the old screen this week.
And you can find me on Instagram at Katie Draws Things. I draw things, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay, well, we will see you next time to talk about Lady and the Tramp 2.
The search for more money.
Basically. Okay, see you then. Thanks for listening to Every Version Ever. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My link tree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.